Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. Today we're going to talk about the role that conservation authorities play in keeping our community green, clean, and healthy. And joining me to do that are two members of council and the CAO of the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, Deborah Martin Downs. And the councilors joining me are Kathy Duddick from Ward 2 and Dave Giddings from Ward 3. That's South Central and Southeast Oakville respectively. And both councilors serve on Oakville Council and the Halton Regional Council. But more importantly, all three of us serve on the board of the Halton Conservation Authority, and our neighbors at the Credit Valley Conservation Authority work with us very closely because our territories overlap. And we in Halton actually financially support the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, although not nearly as much as, say, Mississauga and Brampton do. But you know, we do put our bit in. So I'll let Deborah tell you about herself as it becomes relevant during the discussion. But more importantly, let's establish that conservation authorities were created 73 years ago in 1946 because there was a crying need to get flooding and other dangerous practices under control. And we'll get into that as we talk. And along the way, various things got sort of absorbed into conservation authorities. Deborah, you could describe it that way, right?
Absolutely.
Name some of the things. It's a pretty good list.
Well, just things like the Black Creek Pioneer Village, for example, that Toronto Conservation owns. It's a historical village with tremendous importance in the Toronto area as a tourism facility, but would you own that today if you were given the opportunity? We'd probably say no. So it's a museum, basically. When the Oak Ridges Marine Land Swap happened, also in Toronto Conservation Authority lands, a golf course came with it. And you know what? It was there and it was making money, and there's a growing population around it. Perfect little revenue generator for the Conservation Authority. So it's a ski hill, and in your jurisdiction, Mayor Burton, that's obviously something that today, would we go out and create a ski hill? No, but it came with the property. So
well, we're very pleased with the way our ancillary activities make a whole lot of money for our Conservation Authority and reduce the amount of tax money that we need to ask for.
Absolutely.
So, but anyway, when you get right down to it, why are there 36 conservation authorities instead of one?
Well, that's a very good question. There is one Conservation Ontario that represents all the 36 conservation authorities. But the important, and probably the most important reason for a conservation authority is they were established on a watershed basis. Correct. So they don't go by municipal boundaries. So we take in, as you said, part of Halton, we take in smaller municipalities, Town of Erin, Amaranth, and the Credit Valley watershed. But we look at the way the watershed works and how it drains towards Lake Ontario and the land system, how it all works together. So that was the original intent. And in the 40s, the people at the time, and when you consider what was going on in the 40s, it was pretty
revolutionary.
It was revolutionary, and it's an idea that was right then and it's right today. It's that you can't manage what happens in the water if you don't manage the landscape. And they recognized that, and they planted trees to prevent soil erosion and flooding. Mm-hmm. And mostly for agricultural purposes back then. But today that is still as relevant today as it was then.
And they had a value, and this is my parents' generation, they had a value about local control, local influence, local preference.
Absolutely.
That I think we still share today.
Well, Mayor, good point. And Debbie, you mentioned about 1946, and that was kicked up a notch as a result of Hurricane Hazel.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So in 1956, they amended the Act to give the conservation authorities the power to prevent floods or to prevent runoff and floods to support the management of flooding and pollution. Mm-hmm. So those were, and they actually added recreation at that time too.
I was just going to say that was a key component,
yes.
And that is one that now the province is looking at, saying, wait a minute, you should be doing this. And I'm thinking, but wait a minute, at the onset, that was a component that you gave us, acquiring land so as to protect public interest from flooding.
And
Have they taken recreation out of the core business of the conservation authorities yet, or are they just talking about it?
well, we're not sure. So the way the new act reads is that there are mandatory programs and services that will be delivered by each conservation authority, and they are laid out in the act now. It was used to be anything that served our objects and our purpose was considered to be acceptable. So now it says hazards, management of risk from natural hazards, conservation and management of conservation authority land. So in that, you could assume recreational activities would be part of that. And then the third piece is drinking water source protection as well.
And you mentioned the golf course you inherited is profitable.
Well, I believe so. I'm not at Toronto Conservation anymore, but it was at one time.
No, just curious, because we have ski hills and we have programs and events that are incredibly well attended. And that not only generates 800 jobs
Absolutely.
in Halton, it also contributes $2.5 million to our bottom line. So we are self-funding.
And
Absolutely.
a huge educational component. When you look at Mountsburg, Crawford Lake, several of those we have on a regular basis. Halton Board of Ed, Halton Catholic School Board, they all come on a regular
Yes.
basis through their curriculum.
Yes.
60,000 students a year
Yes.
go through. We have ESL programs, and what a great way to get youth involved. We're seeing it now with climate change. What
Yes.
a great way to have youth involved where they're looking for salamanders and in wetlands, and they're learning from a very young age how important our environment is.
Now, that money that we're making doesn't go for nothing. We maintain and operate all the CAs, the 36 CAs, 900 various flood control structures
Yes.
that are worth about $2.7 billion, and that means they have to be maintained and renewed. And so
Absolutely.
the money absolutely is needed. And the most shocking thing for me in the review that the Ford government is doing on the conservation authorities is they're slapping away revenue sources, and if they continue to do that, the taxpayer is going to be having to pay the difference, and it's like contradictory. It's like the last thing I expect from conservatives.
But the other thing is too, is I don't think the average person really appreciates what the breakdown is in terms of the funding for conservation authorities. Really, the province, we talked about it earlier, 1.5% compared to the municipal and the regional government seem to be the biggest funders for these services. So I'm thinking it's not a huge piece of the pie for them. You know, why would they even consider that when we're being self-sufficient?
Excellent point. And a lot of that infrastructure that we inherited was built in the 40s and
Correct.
50s, and dams don't last forever, as we've experienced at Conservation Halton.
Yes.
And they're not cheap.
And they're not cheap.
They're pretty
That's right.
expensive.
Do you have any leaky dams?
I did. I'm fixing it right now. But
Gee, so do we.
Yeah. So certainly dams, the province provides a funding source called WECI, in by our terms, Water and Erosion Control Infrastructure, and that's $5 million a year. But to address the deficit, that isn't near enough. We don't have assurances that that will continue with this government, and that is something that's absolutely important because infrastructure safety is paramount. We can't have these dams breaking, and when they do, they can have dire consequences. So it's important
Deborah,
to maintain.
I mean, it's not even so much the dam's one component. We had in our area in Burlington where you have these microcells happening,
Yes.
where all of a sudden you realize your infrastructure is really not sufficient to deal with it, whether it's dated infrastructure or larger infrastructure on a regional level, that getting these microcells, wow.
So by microcell, we're getting meteorological tech talk from Kathy.
Rain bombs.
We had
A big rainbow.
Rain
we
bomb,
had a
yeah.
thunderstorm that sat stationary over a key part of Burlington and just dumped rain forever until everything flooded. You know, if you want to see a picture of the way the conservation authorities cover the province, we have a graphic that I'll hold up, and Kristen will show in a second as soon as she can reach it. But this shows how we run all, there you go, run all the way across the province. And we can't zoom in, but what I can do is I can ask Kristen to show a map that shows where the Credit Valley Conservation Authority boundaries are, right next door to us.
We run from Port Credit right to Orangeville.
And then we have a couple that show the Halton Conservation map. And let's see which one we get. We've got,
Hopefully the green one.
we've got one that looks like this.
There
Oh,
we
that's the
go.
best one.
That's the best one.
So this gives you an idea of the river valleys that run through Halton,
Yep.
the Niagara Escarpment, which is the gold color, I'm going to call it. And if you can see the cross-hatching, if you have a high-definition TV, you can probably see the square cross-hatching. That's the famous Ontario Greenbelt. And thanks, Kristen. And against all of this achievement at making life cleaner and greener and safer, we now have this move by the province, and this is the announcement that the Conservation Ontario put up to warn everybody that, strange changes, I would call them radical changes, are being asked for no good purpose.
But before that, we went through this process with the previous government when they, for the first time, actually said, let's look at who does what and how it's working and where we can modify or change things to make the process work better. And I know for us at Halton Conservation and at Halton Region, I don't get any calls anymore in terms of a planning approval going through at a very, slow pace. Now it's very timely, good turnaround, people are working collaboratively, and there's a good team effort, whereas before some people perceived it as the bad guy blocking
Yes.
a planning application. I don't know if you
And
get this.
the provincial standard is to have 80% of those permits in a specified time frame. We're at 97%.
I know.
So we
Browner.
are well over that.
And we made those changes on our own for our own benefit because we want our local government to work smoothly.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we didn't need any help from Mama Province.
No.
And I'm not sure yet that they've given us any help.
Well, we've made commitments to streamlining our work, making sure we've actually suggested areas where we could cut our timelines to be
Exactly.
shorter. We've done client service training for all of the planning staff across the province. Every CA took part in it. And that was very eye-opening for many staff because I think there are staff, and we have our warts too, that think that they should be stopping development. Well, that's not our role. Our role is to ensure that we have the best development possible, that it deals with the stormwater drainage, that it deals with protecting the green space. If you're going to protect it, let's make sure it thrives and is continued
protect the people
in
that want-
longevity,
And
right?
protect the people that want to live in it.
Absolutely.
The one thing I think that came out of that too that I was very impressed with was the fact that don't duplicate services. And quite often, the services a conservation authority can provide saves money on a regional or town basis because you've got experts in
Absolutely.
that field providing you input that you don't have to go out and outsource.
You look at the
right.
number of people that come to our counter asking for ideas and best practices.
Yeah.
Mayor, one of the maps you held up showing Halton specifically, what concerns me most about some of the proposed changes is that Halton has a population of about 560,000. We are currently planning to 2041 where we're going to be 1 million. And as more people move to the region, the demands on Halton Conservation, on the other conservation areas, is going to do nothing but increase. We've got over 1 million people a year.
No, not a year.
No, 1 million people visiting our parks.
That's
Parks.
what
Yes.
we're
Sorry,
doing.
visitations, yes.
We'll
I can't plan for
We'll
that.
have 2 million visitors. We'll make even more money.
That's right.
Well,
That'll be good for
One of the
taxes.
important pieces is that the new act says, well, you're going to manage and conserve and manage our lands.
Right.
Well,
Correct.
all of this is going to be defined by regulation. What is in that bucket of the regulation?
Well,
what does
so
it
far,
allow for?
The way they consult, they barely tell you what they have in mind, and there's very little change between the proposal and the final. It's like they don't listen.
Well, we have, the province is sitting down with every conservation authority to hear our issues.
That's encouraging.
It is tremendously encouraging, and we're hoping that through these conversations, they'll understand better what it is we do, because as you know, we changed ministries too. We always were with Ministry of Natural Resources, and now it's Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. They don't have the history with us, so it's important to learn.
The criticism I have of this fake consultation that this radical government is conducting is this. The previous government did a review of the conservation authorities.
Yes.
It was a model of a consultation. They said, here are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and here are our ideas about how to do it.
Yes.
Please comment. And that was a government that told you what they wanted and listened to your feedback on how to get that.
It was a great process.
This government feels like the don't tell what they want government that doesn't listen to what you advise them on how to get there. It's don't tell, don't listen. So
well, we're hoping that through this process that there will be a concerted effort to listen and to understand, because I think one of the big concerns that we have is if you don't put it in the bucket. And the bucket is the regulations for those mandatory programs and services are how we will levy our municipalities going forward. So it's transparent, and that's fine. But then if it's not in that bucket, then we have to negotiate independently with every single municipality as to whether they are willing to contribute to that outside the levy. And that's a possibility, but what if it's something that is essential to manage the whole system in the watershed basis?
Take out in isolation.
Exactly.
In the minister's first two goes at announcing what he was doing, it sounded like he wasn't even going to let us do that. He wasn't even going to let us bargain with the municipalities to do extra things.
Well, it's in the Act, and the Act was very clear that the municipalities can work with us to create a special agreement to support things. Functionally, we do that anyway, because any kind of capital or outside the levy budget is something we discuss with our municipal partners. We sit down with staff, we sit down with council, we tell them what we're doing, we tell them about our accomplishments, and we tell them what we're going to do with the money that they're giving us.
But see, your point is well taken in the respect that not only, for lack of a better word, information sharing education to our provincial representatives, the average person, as I said at the onset, really doesn't appreciate how a conservation authority works.
Exactly.
Or the fact that with Conservation Halton, we have 12 members that are elected that are on the board, and we have three mayors, and so there's constant contact with our town and our regional partners.
Yes.
Yeah, our four municipalities in Halton love our conservation authority so much we send most of the mayors.
That's really nice, and you guys have really been a strong force with your conservation authority, and I feel the same way. Our board is the same; it's all elected representatives, and they are very much in favor of what we do and why we do it. And it's the outpouring of support, not only from politicians, but from the communities that use our facilities, that use our services, and our municipalities as well it's been tremendous. As soon as some of the concerns were being raised, people are going, well, how can I help? What do we need to do? So our major job is to educate people about what we do and how because I think, yes, we've been there working.
We're the best kept secret.
We're working on the ground, we're boots on the ground, we're doing so many things, but to your original point, locally driven. And that is, if you want to do a provincial plan, that's fine. But how do you implement it? You implement it on the ground in a local area.
And with members of council on the board, we're keenly aware of the fiscal challenges that
we all face,
and the desire to create additional revenues that won't be on the backs of our taxpayers.
Absolutely.
Well, I suppose it's possible that there are people who forget that members of council also pay property taxes and don't like it any more than anybody else.
I'm afraid we can't give you a pass on that.
No.
So.
Yeah.
Well, and we pay tax on our land as well to you guys.
Yeah, there
so
you
you
go.
give us the money, we pay it back. Yes.
Yeah. So we also work together cooperatively to try to build cross-watershed green infrastructure.
Absolutely.
We all work together to support the green belt. I'm pretty sure the Oak Ridges Moraine crosses Conservation Authority boundaries as well. And if are you familiar with the Coots project?
Yes. Yeah. Coots to
Paradise.
Coots to escarpment. Yes.
Yeah, so there's another collaborative thing that's engaged the municipal sector as well as the conservation authorities that the feature passes through. And we have a new miniature piece of that, the sleeping giant.
That's right.
Oh, nice.
Tell her about it.
Well, it's a contiguous area, giant's rib, that is going to encompass a whole new park within a park, if you will.
Yep.
And it's very early stages.
But with private cooperation.
Yes.
As has happened with conservation authorities since the 40s.
Absolutely.
And it's something we're very much looking forward to.
Fantastic. We have a big project, which is the Credit Valley Trail. We initiated
Yes.
that a few years ago. It's going to go from Port Credit to Orangeville, up the Credit Valley. And in fact, it was back in the 50s when we were first set up. Credit Valley was in 1954, and there were watershed reports that were done with recommendations. And that trail was one of the recommendations in the 1956 reports. We're finally finishing it.
Wow.
So now, when the ministers made their unexpected announcements about clamping down on the conservation authorities, most of us, many of us, were in Ottawa at the annual conference of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario.
Yes.
And it caused a big stir. And if they thought they were going to be greeted with joy at this announcement, boy, were they shocked, because nobody liked it. And the messaging became, oh, you don't understand. So I'm familiar with the fact that, and we, all three of us are familiar with the fact that there's been some consultation staff to staff between the ministry and at least some CAs. What can you tell us about that? Have they been more forthcoming about offering up what they think they want to do to get reaction to how it will, whether it will work or not?
We have had virtually no conversations with them. So this upcoming consultation, so after the AMO announcement, there was a lot of pushback, and as I said, a lot of support came out for conservation, and that it does matter and we need to maintain it. I think at this point the letter and the actions at AMO were an unfortunate distraction, and it caused a lot of work for people. That let's put that aside, let's move on in a positive way. There's plenty of things we need to do in the Act, and in fact, one of the most important things in the Act was updating our fines for bad actors, for people who go fill and do things. It was a really positive move, because our fines were $10,000, and in the GTA, that's the cost of doing business.
Slap on the hand.
So they had really strongly increased the fines for contravention of the Act, of the regulations, and those still need to be proclaimed. And they promised they would proclaim, and that hasn't happened yet. And so we're anxiously awaiting, because that was in the 2017 version of the Act, that was in December 17. Then we went into, of course, the election and all, and nothing has happened, and we're now coming into 2020, and we don't have those things proclaimed. And it's a tool in our toolbox that we desperately need.
Well, it's almost as if they're suffering from a case of not invented by us, and therefore we're not going to let it happen.
Well, they did say they would proclaim, but it just hasn't happened.
We're just not sure what's going to be proclaimed yet.
Yeah. So we're looking for some very transparent discussions about what is the problem that we can solve for you, because we have ways to solve. We have things that we can do differently, but if we haven't had the conversation about where the problems lie that they think that we need to fix, then we can't work towards them. We're second guessing ourselves, and that's not useful. So it's not a financial problem that they're trying to fix, because we don't get enough funding from them. So, my authority gets $95,606.17 a year. So out of a $24 million budget. So it is not a financial issue that the province is going to solve on my back. So the municipalities are so critical to us. The other thing, and it's facing you guys too, is that we have the regional governance reviews sitting over our head. So we are going to be allowed to negotiate with municipalities for those non-mandatory programs and services, but who am I negotiating with? And we don't know that yet either. So everybody's going, we're not talking about this stuff until we have a better understanding of what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. So
it's a catch-22,
basically. So we will have a transition time to reorganize our budget and our programs and services, but we don't know who and we don't know when. And so right now we're business as usual and we're carrying on, but there's sort of an expectation that we're starting towards something, but we don't know where we're going. So it's like setting out on a trip, only you don't have a roadmap.
And
or a suitcase.
Fair enough,
Across the ministries, we have the same pattern observable by this government. It's like they can't organize lunch. I mean, in another ministry, they announced that an agency was going to be put on a client-funded basis, and they took their money away, and they promised to send money to the clients to pay them.
Oh.
They haven't sent them the money. And they're not planning to now, I asked, and the minister said, well, we'll do it by the end of next year. And I'm like, well, you know, this agency you put on a client basis, how do you expect them to live for a year? Says, well, we'll have to deal with that. It's like they don't think things through. I believe the reason this government is so low in the polls, they're so low in the polls, they're underwater. And the reason is the average person can tell that they're not governing in a coherent and sensible way. It's kind of like, I want to do this, and I don't care if you tell me that it won't work. I'm going to make you do it anyway.
Well, having the conservation authorities on their side, being underwater is a good thing.
Well, you know, that's the unfortunate part is that we've alluded to it already. The growth in this area,
Yeah.
the people living in very dense housing who want to get out and enjoy green space, and there's more and more people coming, and there's more and more density coming. So people are coming out. Our parks alone, we've experienced a 100% increase in just under 10 years in our park use.
Well, as Dave was mentioning with
and
ours,
the same
it's
thing,
just
right?
huge.
But that's in the existing facilities, and they're not enough.
Well, and it's also with the existing environment.
Yes.
With the 100-year storms going to be a matter of every couple of years.
Exactly. So we have more staff now and we do more floodplain mapping. We need to do more real-time gauges.
Yeah.
So we used to just go out and download a gauge and then bring it back to the office and transform it and all sorts of things. Today we have it so you could see it on your cell phone.
We do the same thing with our dams.
And you have to, because
Remotely
the storms
monitoring.
come, as you said, like in a heartbeat. They're there. They weren't predicted. So the storm that took out Finch Avenue in '05 was this big wake-up call, because we hadn't had a storm like that in probably 20 years. And all of a sudden that happened. Then it happened again, and then it happened again. And every year.
And it's going to continue happening across the region.
But your
all
point
over.
is well taken. Quite a few people said, why didn't we know about this with all the things? So you know, how we've accommodated that is worthwhile.
Yes.
Well, this has been a terrific conversation, and I hope everybody's learned a lot from it about how hard we work to keep our area clean, green, and safe. And I want to thank you for joining us on Oakville Matters, and invite you to tune in again.